All right, we'll get going. Thanks everybody for joining here tonight to discuss the Grandview Avenue traffic calming project. Project team is myself. My name is Adam Lind. I'm the bicycle and pedestrian coordinator for the city of Arvada. And then also with us is John Ferruzzi, who is the manager of our mobility and innovation team. So as we get started and go through the presentation, again, you can use the Q&A function to ask questions. We're not going to stop mid-presentation, so we'll go through it all and then answer any questions, and we can come back to earlier slides. So we'll start off with some project background, talk about traffic calming, what it is, why we're here to discuss it, talk about some of the data collection and analysis that we've done. Some of you may have seen some of this information on Speak Up, some of you may not, so it might be new. We'll talk about the proposed improvements and the overall plan and how that also ties into our pilot project. Discuss and review kind of how we are planning to attain public feedback, and then we'll open up for Q&A. So for some background, the study area is on Grandview from Independence to Old Wadsworth. It's made up kind of pretty much the same roadway and configuration, but it does have 3 different sections of speed limits. In Old Town, it's 20, and then it turns to 25 around the school, east of Carr Street, and then west of Carr Street, the speed limit goes up to 30 miles an hour. Also, some additional information is around that school. We do have a school speed limit to go down to 20 when flashing. We have a speed radar sign to reinforce what their speed is as they're driving through. And then there also is a traffic signal to help students cross the street there, getting to and from school. So some more background, not directly about Grandview, but related. The city initiated pedestrian safety pilot projects on Grandview Avenue in Old Town and on West 57th in 2019. So you may have seen the flex post bump outs, the planners that we had in Old Town was kind of our first foray into traffic calming recently. Our next step, we actually completed a corridor study of West 57th Avenue in 2020 that had a lot of public engagement, multiple meetings, and we recently produced kind of a final project there that we'll talk about in a few slides. That's ended up recommending traffic calming, some separated bike lanes, and some additional safety features. So when we presented this to City Council in early 2020, I want to say, or early 2021 maybe, they had recommended and directed us to look at traffic calming on Grandview Avenue, specifically because they hear similar requests about speeding and cut through traffic, and then the potential for traffic calming on West 57th to push some traffic onto Grandview Avenue as well. And so before we move forward with anything related to 57th, we wanted to take this time to study Grandview Avenue and get some public feedback and see where the community stands on that. So in addition to council's feedback, our department and the police department received calls from residents reporting speeding along Grandview, and we've collected some data to show, we'll show you what that results were. So the 57th corridor study was along most of 57th, but then did cuts down on Garrison Street and west along Grandview to Independence, where it then ties into the Van Bibber Creek Trail. So we were looking at this corridor from mainly a pedestrian and bicycle perspective. So not only how people can move along the corridor to connect to parks, schools, Old Town, Walmart, and the shopping there, but also how they would continue on to the Van Bibber Creek Trail, whether that's for recreation or transportation. So this is just a quick snapshot of the results of that study. We do have recommendations for the whole corridor, but this is kind of showing you what those recommendations were. So we've got separated bike lanes along the north and south side of the street, which means there's some kind of physical separation between the travel lanes and the bike lanes, which greatly improves safety and comfort. And then it also recommended at these 2 locations at Carr Street and at Brentwood Street with the entrance to the school, what's called a raised crosswalk. So it's kind of combines a crosswalk, a speed hump, and what's called a speed table. And we'll show some more details about that in a minute. But again, it's another way for the people crossing the street to feel safer and for drivers to have to slow down as they approach these crosswalks where kids are moving back and forth. And then we also do have a recommendation for a neighborhood traffic circle along Balsam Street here. So these are a few features that were recommended along 57th. And as you can see, having several of these could cause some drivers to want to divert onto 58th or down to Grandview. So as part of 57th, the study, we do have some recommendations similar as pilot project locations to launch this and test things out. So these 3 locations here show where we're proposing pilot project locations on 57th. Right here on the west end by Everett, we're proposing a speed cushion. This blue star right here is in front of the school where we would have a raised crosswalk. And then this red star at Yukon is where we would propose a temporary traffic circle. And we chose these locations trying to geographically spread them out through the corridor, but also based on we get the most requests for help and assistance at Yukon, and then also trying to benefit the kids walking to school the most. So that's kind of where we're starting with 57th, and then we'll show how this ties into Grandview in a bit. So what is traffic calming? According to the FHWA, which is the Federal Highway Administration, the purpose of traffic calming is to support the livability and vitality of residential and commercial areas through improvements in non-motorist safety, mobility, and comfort. And so mainly what you're trying to do is reduce speeds, or especially speeding vehicles. So the design that we're recommending isn't to try and get people to go 10 or 15. We're trying to cut down those people that are going 35, 40 miles per hour as they speed through these neighborhood streets. And traffic calming measures can consist of horizontal, vertical, lane narrowing, roadside, or other features that use self-enforcing physical or psychoperception means to produce desired effects. And so what that means is kind of when you have a narrow lane versus a wide lane, you have a feel that the road is tighter. It's not any less safe, but it does show the effects of causing people to drive slower and speed less. So another question is why would we look at traffic calming? The main benefit is that traffic calming is present and effective 24/7. So, you know, we've heard requests for police officers, and the police will come out when they have the chance, but there's not enough officers, resources, effort to really be there, especially on local or neighborhood streets 24/7. So these devices reinforce that speed control 24/7. It's relatively low cost and high benefit to achieve that goal of speeding reduction. There's lots of research that have proven this to be successful, and the benefits of lower speeds, not only is it's safer, but it gives you more reaction time. So it's likely to reduce the number of crashes. And then since people are driving slower, those crashes that do occur will be less severe. And for those living on the corridor, you know, it improves comfort when you're out walking your dog or your family, less noise from people speeding, and more safety as you're trying to cross the street and get to some of those destinations. So here's just a quick overview of a few different examples that we're going to talk about, and some that we're not. So speed humps are here on the left, which just generally covers the full length of the roadway and is a solid raised platform. Speed cushions have cut-throughs for emergency vehicles. Traffic circles, some of you might be familiar with. In the city, we have one kind of neighborhood one similar to this at Hoyt and 52nd. And then chokers and bump outs narrow the roadway down and help visually narrow the street to help reduce speeding. So getting into some of our data collection and analysis, in the last year, we did 7 different speed counts here along the corridor. So covering from west to east, generally spaced about 1,000 feet or so. And that way we felt like we could get a good coverage of what those different speeds were across the different speed limit zones and across the corridor. So there's a good bit of information here, and we'll give some time for people to take it in and look at it. This information is also available on the Speak Up page with the interactive map where you can click on the speed locations and this information will pop up. So 1 starts at the west, 7 at the east. And what we've highlighted in red is more or less where we have people speeding 7 miles per hour or more over that speed limit in one direction. So this is kind of what we in the city have identified as the speeding issue. More than 7 is an issue, less than 7 is less of an issue where we wouldn't necessarily push on to implement traffic calming. And since we pretty much have this speeding issue from the west end all the way to Balsam, we've kind of proposed to have these traffic calming devices in that section. And you look at number 6, that's in the 25 mile per hour section, and speeds were about 3 miles over. And then you get into the 20 mile per hour section and speeds in around Old Town are under the speed limit, which is great to see. And then the volumes here are in between 2,500 and 3,000 for the most part. So that's kind of what we expected for this street, and we'll talk about what that means here in a second. So looking at crash data as well, the crashes have been pretty steady since 2016, more or less. They are spread out throughout the corridor. There isn't really any major clustering, but there has been 77 crashes between 2015 and 2019. And of those, there was 1 pedestrian and 2 bicycle crashes. So, anything we can do to reduce that number would be beneficial for the community, safer for drivers, and safer for everybody here. So to kind of summarize the results here, as I mentioned, there's several locations on Grandview in that 30 mile per hour zone and 1 in the 25 where we have speeding of 7 miles per hour or more. The vehicle volumes represent what the range between a minor collector and a collector classification for the city. So it's not functioning as a local street. It really is functioning as something a little bit higher to get people from, Independence to Old Town and beyond. The bike and ped route that we mentioned kind of along that 57th corridor study to connect with the Van Bibber Creek Trail, which includes Grandview west of Garrison Street, 36.9 miles per hour. So if you're biking on the road by yourself as an adult or with your family and kids trying to get to the trail and into Van Bibber, you're really not going to feel comfortable in that environment. And the permanent speed radar signs and school zone signs have a limited effect. They're pretty good in this area based on the design, but research generally shows that speed radar signs lose their effectiveness the longer they are out there. So from our perspective, we're choosing to take a proactive approach to this and move the project and propose this project to solve these speeding issues that we've found. So recommending physical devices to manage speed without constant police department presence, which is, more or less not very feasible for them to be out there all the time. The police spend a lot of their time enforcing speed limits on higher speed and higher volume roads. So they're more likely to be on a Wadsworth or a Kipling to get people going 60 and 70 in a 40 or a 45 than putting resources towards a street that has a lower speed and a lower volume. We're proposing to reduce the speed limit in that 30 mile per hour section to 25 so that it's a same consistent speed limit across the whole corridor. There really isn't a good reason why one section is 30 and one is 25 based on the design of the roadway. So we feel that making that consistent will be a benefit. The traffic calming treatments on Grandview Avenue will help with cut through traffic. So if people are using Grandview to bypass other streets, they won't be able to choose this one as kind of like a free flow. And there'll be those devices to help limit that cut through traffic. As we mentioned, traffic calming has been shown to increase safety for vulnerable populations and roadway users, which means people walking, biking, rolling, wheelchair users, etc. And then this will also help to support bicycle and pedestrian access to those neighborhood destinations, whether it's the schools, parks, Old Town, or elsewhere. So getting into the plan here, this shows our overall plan that has 6 proposed speed humps and cushions, and they're generally spaced 400 to 600 feet apart. We're trying to find spaces where they wouldn't be directly in front of houses, in front of driveways. And so this is kind of the range that we found. Some of the research shows between 250 and 500 feet is ideal. Otherwise, you'll have people speeding up in between devices. But this range between 400 and 600 seemed to work best for this corridor. So we know that we get questions about why not just putting stop signs along the corridor. So we wanted to answer that question as well. Stop signs exist to assign right of way and are not used for speed control. So that's one of the main reasons. There are strict guidelines for when and where to use stop signs. So there's a kind of engineering guidebook called the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, MUTCD. You may have heard of this. And it really looks at roadway volumes, crash history, and things like that to say when, where you can't use stop signs. One of the downsides, if we decided to just put a stop sign, somewhere along this corridor, say at, Field Street or Everett Street, where maybe the warrants weren't there, they become unexpected for drivers, and you get people running stop signs or not expecting them, and it can lead to more crashes and people not following those stop signs. So we really try and follow the MUTCD and the warrants that are prescribed there when we implement stop signs and always stops. So again, what we're talking about along this corridor is both speed cushions and speed humps. Speed cushion, they're pretty similar. A speed cushion consists of 2 or more raised areas that are placed along the roadway. They're similar height and length to a speed hump, but the main benefit of a speed cushion is that there's space in between, whether it's designed like this in the middle of the roadway or in the middle of a lane, that would allow emergency vehicles to pass through without having to slow down. So this is something we've been coordinating with our fire department and other emergency services on. With there being a fire station on 57th, we had a little bit of a different conversation there, but we wanted to open up the discussion here as well about speed cushions and speed humps. Speed hump is, an elongated mound in the roadway that covers from one side to the other. This includes pretty much curb to curb. So even where there are parking spaces, so that drivers can't kind of weave around to the parking space to get around the speed hump. And they're typically 3 to 4 inches in height, and they're kind of designed to slow people down to between 20 and 25 miles an hour. So speed humps are a little bit different than speed bumps, which most cities don't use anymore. That's kind of the really short and high speed bump that produces a really strong effect and isn't really comfortable for anybody and has some downsides. So cities generally move away from those and have gone towards this speed hump or speed cushion design that is still effective, but is less, annoying or painful for you as you go over the speed bump. So to focus on the pilot project locations, we have 2 proposed locations, one on the west and one on the east. We're looking at potentially doing a speed hump over here on the west side, and then a speed cushion on the east side. And we felt like these were the best locations to kind of show, once you kind of enter this corridor from Independence, that, hey, this is a little bit different, slow down, it's a neighborhood. And same thing on the east. If you're going into the school zone, then you have that same kind of reminder that, hey, slow down, this is a different area. And if you're coming west, then you've kind of already gone through the school zone and seen all the signs. And it's a reminder not to go ahead and speed up right here. So the other item with our pilot projects is that we're planning to use modular rubber devices, and we'll get into some more details about that, but it's not going to be a full higher cost construction at that time of initial installation. So again, this is kind of just showing the locations that we proposed at 57th for that pilot project. And then here you can kind of see everything together. So we've got it more or less equally spread out geographically from west side to east side. Got a few different devices here that we're trying out. And the real goal for us is to test these devices, see which ones are effective, both from a data standpoint of speed and then a standpoint of public feedback of which ones are are beneficial and work for the community. And if there's, the speed humps don't work, but speed cushions do, then as we move forward, and if we make these permanent, we would know to just use speed cushions versus using speed humps. So this is our kind of pilot project goal for both corridors if we move forward. So this here is a picture of the rubberized speed humps or something similar. As you can see, they're made of rubber. They look very similar to permanent devices. They can be assembled and installed by our city crews quickly. So that is a lower cost for us for installation. We don't have to hire a contractor. They also can be removed easily. So if we go through this pilot project process and it's not successful, we can remove these. It doesn't do any serious damage to the roadway. There's not any major patching or expensive costs that we would be bearing if this was a failed project. Another benefit is, if we go through this process and they work, we can then use these modular devices again at a different location. And that's, a cost-efficient way for us to continue this project and this process as we expand it to other areas of the city. And it's about 20 to 40% of the final cost for a permanent installation. So again, focusing on that cost efficiency and wanting to use these in a manner that tests out these devices before we know how it's going to work for the city and for the public. This is a much more efficient and cost benefit way to install these devices and test out traffic calming. So talking about the process here, this is if we decide to go forward, kind of how we'll measure our data and collect feedback. We plan to install the devices on West 57th first, and then on Grandview if supported. That's because we've already gone through this process with the public and city council about 57th, and this is kind of our first go around. So we figure we'll focus there first, and then shortly after we'll be able to apply these devices on Grandview, and that can give us a little bit of time to collect data about diversion once we've done some installation on West 57th. The pilot project period will last between 6 and 9 months to ensure time for multiple opportunities to collect data, gather public feedback, and determine the effectiveness. And the reason why we're showing that time range is because we want to make sure that we're covering both kind of summer, spring, and winter to get the full picture on operations and maintenance and see how our maintenance crews are able to handle this during the snowstorms and things of that nature. So the data that we collect will be shared with the public and presented as a final report, and we will likely schedule a workshop with City Council to present that information before making any decisions about moving forward with the results. So at that time, we'll make a recommendation that could be to continue with these devices in their modular form. We're starting with 2 on Grandview. If those are successful, we could add 2 more before we make any final decisions. Or we could say, this is working and we're ready to make all 6 of the devices permanent in asphalt along Grandview. So it'll depend on the feedback and the data that we collect about how we make this decision. And then lastly, the permanent traffic calming devices would be installed with future street repaving projects. So it's likely that Grandview will get repaved in the next few years, and depending on when that happens, we would make that switch from modular to full pavement design and installed traffic calming devices. So in terms of this initial process about the Grandview Avenue traffic calming project, if you're not familiar with our Speak Up page, you can visit that to stay involved with the project, take surveys, give us feedback there. Here's the link, we'll make it available. We're gonna have the comment period open until Sunday, April 25th at 11:59 p.m. So that's just about 2 weeks. We've already started to get some feedback from people, and that's great. You can send an email to me directly. My email address is here below. It's just alind@arvada.org. City staff will review the feedback to make a decision to move forward with the pilot project on Grandview or not. And we'll share that information on the Speak Up page. And if we do move forward, we'll work directly with those property owners near the traffic calming devices as we finalize the locations and make sure we can best accommodate these. So with that, I will open this up for questions. We got 2 questions beforehand. One was from a resident asking if we could have traffic calming devices between Carr Street and Independence. And so I'm hoping if you're here, you see that we have one proposed for the pilot period. And then if we do move forward with all 6, there are several in between there. And the other question that we got was related to police enforcement and ticketing. And so we did reach out to our traffic enforcement unit prior to this meeting. They say they're available to come out on request, but in their past opportunities that they've come out to do enforcement, they haven't really clocked anybody at a speed that gives them where they've given a ticket. And so that's one of the reasons why we want to put traffic calming out there, because our data shows that people are speeding 7 and 8 miles per hour above the speed limits. But you kind of get that effect when a police officer is out there. People see them, they slow down, and then they don't write those tickets. And so with that, it seems like we've got several questions both in the Q&A and maybe the chat. And so John, I'll open that up for you and we can see about answering these. Thank you.
Yeah, sounds good, Adam. Thank you. So one of the first questions that we have is the team looking at alternatives to humps or cushions for this corridor?
At this time, we're not looking directly at those. These devices are kind of the most effective low-cost solutions. We're open to other ideas, so if you have those, feel free to email them or provide that with Speak Up. We definitely are not looking at chicanes. We know we've had some negative experience with those on 52nd, so we want to stay away from those. But right now we're focusing on speed humps and speed cushions, but open to ideas and discussions.
Thank you. The next question is, I've seen a lot of accidents on Field and Grandview. Do you have any plans to specifically address that area, seeing as the stop signs aren't helping much?
Yeah, that's a great question, and something our traffic engineering team has looked at. So they've added, I think, John, you can correct me if I'm wrong, larger stop signs there and added stop bars. So that's something that we'll continue to look at. And if there does continue to be issues, if our traffic calming program is successful, traffic circles have shown to be really beneficial about reducing crashes and serious crashes. So that could be something we could look to add into that intersection as well, but not specifically with this initial pilot project.
Thank you, Adam. The next is a comment that I object to a 25-mile-per-hour speed limit on Grandview between Carr and Independence. Not only would that merely result in more tickets, but seems unnecessary given the volume of traffic in this area. Would you like to respond to that?
I think we appreciate that comment, and it's something we'll take into consideration as we try and decide what the best results are for this corridor.
Okay, yeah. And then the next question is, can the 4 proposed speed humps proposed between Carr and a bit west of Garrison be converted to every/other speed hump and speed cushion? I drive this route every day, multiple times, and that would be onerous on the driving experience.
Yeah, thanks for that comment. It's definitely something we will look into and monitor as we move forward. The spacing, as I mentioned, was kind of based on some guidance from the Institute of Traffic Engineers that aim to put those every 250 to 500 feet because of people speeding up. But if we find that these 2 or 3 we put in solves the problem, then that's all we need to do. We're not specifically looking to put 6 or 7 speed humps here. We're just trying to effectively reduce those people that are speeding. So however many that ends up being fit is what we can go with. So we'll definitely evaluate that as we move forward. Thanks for that comment.
All right, the next question is, what is a modular device made of rubber material?
So it's recycled rubber, and it kind of comes in different pieces. I think I can maybe scroll back here to share the screen. So you can see it's kind of piecemealed together, and they're kind of nailed or anchored into the ground so that they don't come up. Plows can go over them, but they're still raised and kind of mimic a normal cushion, speed cushion or speed hump.
Thank you, Adam. The next question is, in the pilot, which location will be a speed hump versus speed cushion?
Yeah, so we're proposing at this point the west end, the one closest to Independence, to be a speed hump, and the one on the east end to be a speed cushion.
Great, thank you. The next question is, how does the concept of a pilot project feed into the long-term plan? What is the reasonable expectation for the implementation of the long-term plan?
Yeah, so I think kind of as we touched on, the Grandview Avenue is planned to be repaved in the next few years. So that's kind of our sunset kind of end time. But in the meantime, we wanted to go ahead and get these devices out. They function pretty much the same as a permanent device. They're similarly sized and shaped, but they probably can't take years and years of cars driving over them. So somewhere between, I think, maybe 2 to 3 years. Yeah, I'd say 2 to 3 years of modular. And then at that point, when the street was repaved, we would be upgrading to those permanent concrete devices. But we do plan to make kind of our decision about whether they're effective or not in that 6 to 9 month time frame for these two. And then, like I mentioned, we might add 2 more in or add 1 more in and see how that affects it. And if we get to the end result of people, more or less obeying the speed limit, then we wouldn't need to go to all 6. Hope that
Thank you, Adam.
Yeah.
The next question is, the condition of the roadway along Grandview has deteriorated significantly recently. Will the street be repaved before the traffic calming devices will be installed?
No, so that's kind of what we were just touching on. Is we're aware that the street is in need of repaving, and our streets team is aware, and they've got it scheduled. I think some concrete replacement is supposed to happen this year or next, and then paving would be coming after that. So we feel like it's a good time to, kind of get these devices in and test them out without having to damage a freshly paved street. And then by the time we have our decision and the street's repaved, everything can be done at once new, which will again help save money, be lower cost for the city, and then have everything in effectively at the same time and set for the next 10 plus years.
Great, yeah. The next question is, when will these pilot devices be installed in Grandview? And there's a comment that we fully support the efforts to slow traffic.
Thanks. We don't have a set time yet, but I think our goal would be this summer. So we've got to go through a little bit of procurement and make sure, after we get this whole kind of process done with the public and see which way we're going. But yeah, we are aiming to install the devices this summer if we have support.
The next is a comment and a question. It says, since Field Street is a major cross through to get to 44th, I suggest a 4-way stop at Field and Grandview. The space between the speed bump proposed to the west and the Carr Street 4-way, it gives speeders a long way to speed up.
Thanks for your comment. We can, we'll work with our traffic engineering team. I think, John, unless we've done a recent study, we can kind of do that warrant analysis and see if anything's changed recently to call for a 4-way stop there. But as we mentioned, if we're not meeting our warrants, we don't want to just add stop signs because they can lead to more crashes.
Correct. So there's a comment here that Arvada does not install speed humps according to an arvada.org link. There's information from the website and the link posted, and then says, why start now and why not use speed humps on 57th Street project? Yeah,
so I mean, that is definitely something we're aware of, and that's why we're kind of proposing this as a pilot project along both corridors. Historically, the city hasn't done that, but as we're a growing city and there's more traffic coming and more people, we're noticing there's a lot more speeding going on. I think I just did a whole batch of 6 or 7 speed studies around the city, and almost every one of them had speeds above 7 miles an hour. And so it's just something we're seeing more, and we want to be responsive. We're getting these requests from residents and complaints, and the police department is limited in their resources and where they can be all the time. And so this is kind of our next attempt at focusing more on bike and pedestrian and vehicle safety and neighborhood safety. And traffic calming has been proven locally and across the country to be an effective measure to reduce speeding and solve some of those issues. So that's why we are kind of taking a new approach and going slowly here to see if these are effective and supported by the community before we kind of launched a citywide traffic calming program that would have a set of rules and procedures for the city to initiate and also for residents to initiate along local streets.
Next, there's a comment. It says speed humps do not work. If there's no speeding while the police are there, it means that it works. It just needs to be done more often. So I think there's the individual here is advocating for enforcement, it sounds like.
Yeah, thanks for that comment. As I mentioned, we can ask the police department to go out there, but they're getting lots of requests all over the city, and there's just not enough officers, and they've got lots of responsibilities for them to be staked out 24/7 most of the days at all the locations around the city. So as we kind of touched on at the beginning, that's one of the benefits about traffic calming is that it is there 24/7 and it is there to reinforce the speed limit and cut down on those high-end speeders.
Yeah, the next question is, what are the drawbacks of speed humps for people living near them? And what are the trade-offs? For example, increased noise, increased vibrations, increased pollution, etc.
Yeah, so there definitely can be a localized increase in noise for speed humps directly. That is one of the potential drawbacks at that location. So that's kind of why we tried to place these as much as we could in between houses and not directly in front of somebody's front door. There really isn't much of an increase in pollution or vibrations from these, but there can be a noise issue, and that's why we're going to try and reach out directly with those property owners and see who's willing and able to support this at that location, and we'll kind of adjust as we need. But for some, and maybe a lot, there's more benefit than drawback for this kind of speeding reduction along their corridor.
Great, thank you. Another question is there really a speeding problem? Is it possible that we're working on a solution for the vocal minority? I do not feel that there is a speeding problem on our street and we own a home on the fastest moving portion of Grandview according to the study. And by the way, the individual is thanking you for your presentation today.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, there isn't a strict definition of what is a speeding problem or not. In the little bit of feedback that we've seen so far from Speak Up, we've had several residents say yes, they do say there's a speeding issue. Some say there's not. Some might say 5 over is a speeding issue. Some say 10. But for us, we've kind of defined it as 7 miles per hour or more over the speed limit in one direction. So from that data that we collected, there was, I think, 4 locations that were right at 7 or more, and then 1 that was at 6. So for the city, we do define that as a speeding problem.
All right, and the last question here is related to Old Town, and I'll answer that, Adam. So the question is, how long will Old Town be closed? The traffic now comes down Grandview, speeds increase between Carr and Independence. One deterrent does not seem adequate. And to help answer that question, Old Town has been closed due to COVID and the support of the businesses. Initially, it was a permit that was identified till the end of last summer, and that has been extended since. In the process of that closure, folks from the neighborhoods and the businesses have expressed support through surveys. And the next step with the Old Town closure is proposing a 5-year semi-permanent closure of the streets to continue with an investment in the area and basically supporting the businesses through the economic impacts of COVID. So that does obviously change the pattern of traffic through the area. And that's why we're looking at Grandview and 57th Avenue as our corridors for mitigating the impacts. Thank you for your question. One last question, Adam, and maybe this is your last slide. It's where's the best place to leave feedback and suggestions going forward? I think you have a speak up page, is that correct?
Yeah, so on the speak up page, there's a survey you can take, and at the end, there's kind of like an open-ended tell us more. There's a section on there for ideas that you can post. And then you can also just email me directly, alind@arvada.org, and we'll compile all the questions, comments, feedback, and then use that all as we make our decision. And I think for those of you who've suggested that maybe one isn't enough, or that the main issue is between, after Carr Street, please give us that feedback, and, we can potentially move one of these speed humps from, west of Garrison to east of Garrison, closer to Carr, or potentially add another one if we hear enough from the community that that's kind of where they want the issue. So in addition to whether or not you think it's a good idea or a bad idea, if you have other ideas about different types of traffic calming, other solutions, different locations we should choose, please, provide any and all of that feedback.
Adam, those were all the questions. So with that, we should conclude the meeting.
Yeah, great. And then just to reemphasize, this meeting and recording will be posted on Speak Up. The presentation will be posted again as a PDF so that you can click on these links and they'll be usable for you. And if anybody else has questions, your neighbors weren't able to make it, point them here or have them reach out to me directly, and we'll be happy to answer any questions.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate you attending our meeting, and have a good night. Take care.
Yep. Thanks, everybody.